Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Well, hello and welcome once again. I'm Dirk and this is my friend Frank DeMarco, and we've been chatting on all kinds of subjects, and today we thought we might talk about magic. And I think I'm leading off today, if I remember correctly.
Hope so.
One of the things that we've both of us, I think, experienced a lot of things that people would consider magic in the world. And people have quite often, I think, an interpretation about what magic is that goes beyond, I think, what it is in my experience. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit, and then we can go from there. One of the things that I've seen in the world, I come from a hard science background, about as hard as you can get in physics and chemistry and all kinds of things. Practiced engineering for 40 years and lots of heavy industrial work. And what I experienced through life was that the rules and things that govern how this 3D reality work exist, and we partly understand them, but we partly don't. Now, what it was for me growing up is I experienced time in a very bizarre way for most people that I took as completely normal because it was what I experienced, where I would remember the future for periods, and then I could decide to do things differently than what I remembered the coming future to be. And this is not deja vu. That later morphed as my life went on. It went away at about age 11, and it came back in a different way in my 30s or thereabouts, where I would be talking with someone and realize that the past that I had experienced no longer existed. It had changed in some way.
And it was not a matter of a mistaken memory.
No, there's no mistaken memory. And this is very much the thing people call the Mandela Effect. Or Mandela Effect. And it's interesting, those two words.
Yeah, I heard that.
I hadn't considered that before. Well, anyway, the point of it was that for me, coming from a hard science background, what I'm seeing is firsthand evidence. It's an N=1 experiment where I'm experiencing something in reality that isn't out in the world. And so then, the first question is, okay, is there something going on inside my head that's not right? The answer is no. What I'm experiencing is real. But what it showed was something in reality that's different than what the accepted wisdom is about how reality works. Now, how does it really work? I have no freaking idea. And that's part of the ongoing wonder and exploration. And that itself is fundamentally science. Science, people think of it in some ways as being, a handed down wisdom. It's not. It's the exploration of the world and what's out here. Well, then beyond that, and beyond that, then, doing all kinds of other things, people have done energy work, remote viewing, all kinds of things with telepathy, telekinesis, you name it, where people have claimed various skills. And so one of the things that I explored in junior college and beyond was all of that. Is there anything here? And I'm coming at it as a hard science guy. And what I found, along with others, where we're doing what we thought were controlled experiments, was, yeah, it's real. In some cases, it's subtle. In some cases, it's really hard to replicate. In some cases, it's really hard to control. And ultimately, what we found was some of the basic ideas in science about having controlled experiments actually cannot work, because with telepathy and telekinesis and other things, and the ability to communicate forward and backward in time to some degree, those controls don't actually work. And so they're kind of a fiction that we agree to use. And for the most part, they kind of work, but they're not entirely whole. They're not entirely real. Anyway, where all this goes is that in playing around with lots of friends and doing a lot of this over a lot of years, I've gotten to experience a lot of what people would call magic, where things occur in ways that they, at least by what we think we know, should not be possible. And yet here they are. Mm-hmm. Now, I think for a lot of people who maybe have not applied quite so much rigor to it, they can't have the kind of detail backing about this is true, this is not true, to be able to assess whether or not this is something that's a matter of reality. And so you just apply standard rules about, do I believe this or not? Which is perfectly fine and wonderful. And it's a different way of seeing the world, and that's okay. But then we come to the real core of it is, all right, if the world is somewhat different than we think it is, and magic like this is possible and real, what does that tell us about ourselves? What does that tell us about reality? What can we objectively do with it? What should we think about it? All kinds of things. Anyway.
Let's pause that for a moment. Stop right there. I'm trying to hear this from the point of view of my imagined listener who's listening to this, and they're still undecided, presumably, whether or not you and I belong in a lunatic asylum. And
there is
we
that.
are too. But it seems to me we're all in a situation where there are things that we think we know, there are things that we know that we don't know, and there are things that we don't know that we don't have any clue that we don't know.
Yep.
But that's actually not three categories, it's one category. And it depends on which way you're looking at your life and looking at the world in any given moment, how you see things. So everything you described, I can hear a hard-headed person saying, oh, it probably wasn't rigorously examined, or exactly. There were, experimental errors, those kinds of things. And that kind of attitude cannot be countered because it says it presumes I know, when in fact they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that science and religion, you and I have had this discussion many times, they each see one part of reality and they're not really firmly footed in the other, but they think they are. Science deals with experimentation and with numbers, with facts, with anything that can be sensorially verified or disproved. Religion deals with things that are not in that category, and they keep wandering into each other's territory, and there's nothing wrong with that, and there's everything wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, and in both cases, they're both coming from, not always, but in a lot of cases, they're coming from a place of belief to start.
Which is fine if they know it,
right?
But it's not fine if they think they, as you know. Thing is, so are we. And I want to emphasize that for anybody watching this. It probably sounds like you and I think that we've got the final answer and we know the way things are. Well, I know, but it sounds that way because we're very, very confident about it, right? But all we really, as far as I can see, all we really can know is what we experience. And even that knowing may be wrong. But the experience is more likely to be real than an opinion about something that we haven't experienced.
Exactly. In my case, in going down the long journey of my life, I'm now 70. I have experienced all kinds of weird things. And as I look back on it, I've had a huge raft of these kinds of experiences.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. But in looking at it, what I realize is I know very little. I know some of the things that happened. In a lot of cases, I have no comprehension how they happened. And, some of those are probably statistical flukes or other kinds of things that are just, randomness creeping in. But in a lot of cases, they are absolutely not that. But then if I try to find a mechanism for how it works, I don't know what the mechanism could possibly be.
Now, there's one piece that we should look at right now, I think, is the mechanism idea, because in your case, from a hard science background, that's what you look for. In my case, I figure, okay, the mechanism is invisible to me. It's like a computer programmer You put in the instructions, and then what happens in there is a black box. You have no idea, and you have
Yeah.
to judge from the output, and you keep adjusting the input until you get the output that you expect. Well, if one starts with the assumption that we are things, we are rocks in space, as somebody said. In other words, things, if we take what appears to be reality at its face value, and that there are things and there are energy and there's space and there is time, and they're each the way they appear, you have a very different set of rules that can be induced from that or deduced from that than if you assume that the universe is thought, or that is to say that it is some kind of I want to use the word energy, and yet that's not quite the right word. It's something that is before energy, before matter, before time, before space. It's all one unified non-thing that takes these appearances. That is to say, that second view of reality takes miracles and all in its stride much easier, because it doesn't have a lot of
It doesn't have to
this,
fit.
therefore that.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the first way of looking at the universe is a way of making sense of it as best we can without postulating things and going wild. Each one has its own drawbacks.
And one of the big things that I've seen in science, in hard science, is a fundamental presumption, not an assumption where you've at least, you recognize that you've made an assumption, whether you wrote it down or not, but presumptions kind of lie before assumptions, where they work like assumptions, but you don't even realize you have them.
No, you think you're dealing with what's real.
Right. And in one of those is that in hard science, there's quite often a thing of, it isn't real until we can show how it works and prove that it is. That's not a true statement. It's a false statement. But it's a fundamental presumption that often is used informally without ever being stated. And it's applied pretty rigorously sometimes.
And if you're dealing with things that can be measured, that can be very useful, as Western technology demonstrates. But also, if you're dealing with things that part of them can be measured and part of them can't, you can go wildly wrong and be absolutely confident about it. And unfortunately, you become arrogant about it, and then you're unable to even talk to the people who say, well, actually, the world's a little different than that, because all of your unconscious assumptions say, oh, no, it can't be. You don't know science. You're ignorant.
I have a brief story that I think highlights one of the problems in the hard science world of, in dealing with the Hanford cleanup and trying to get the science done well and everything. A coworker of mine, Ralph Patt, he kept running into a problem where the scientists were caught in this kind of dilemma. And he could see clearly that they were presuming all kinds of things. And so one of the things that he did is he created this little box, and it's got these knobs on top, and it's got an RS-232C connector on each end. And he took it to a meeting. I was at the meeting when he did this, and he was showing this to these folks, and he's a geohydrologist, and he told them he's got this device that allows them, to take the data inputs and run it through this processor and end up with processed outputs that the modeling becomes much easier. And they all wanted the box. Oh my God, they wanted the box. And that's when he opened it up and showed them there's no wires inside.
And they said, after they finished lynching him,
what he was trying to get to them was that they were making all kinds of presumptions about things, and it didn't work. It was a silly thing, but it was fun to watch it happen, as to see the shock on their mind. But they didn't make the connection that they were fighting a set of presumptions that they didn't even know they had.
Well, when we decided that we would talk about magic, I hadn't actually thought that it would connect with the subject of robots, but of course it very much does.
It does.
And my particular use of the word robot means any kind of system of actions that are beneath our level of consciousness that shape our reality because they tell us what reality is without our knowing it. Any of those robots, and they're, as you know, Dirk, they're easily dealt with if you can find them, bring them up to consciousness, reprogram them. They'll do what you want. But if they are shaping your view of reality and you don't know it, you think, I have seen it, therefore it's true. And well, you've seen it, and therefore it's true from that point of view. But and that's a rather big however.
Well, let's go to some other ones too. That one of the things that you and I have both done and seen is the idea of spoon bending. And it's like until you actually have experienced that, we have really rigid ideas about how physical matter works.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an interaction that occurs on an energetic level, and exactly what that energy is, or even if it is energy, what this basis is unclear. But you get to this place where you can reach, it's partly emotion and it's partly not in your mind, where when you get into this certain state, the matter of like a spoon actually becomes almost plastic. It turns soft in its feel. It's like, how in the world does that work? Basic metallurgy would say that's not possible. And yet I've witnessed it firsthand and seen people do things that are just by conventional science absolutely physically not possible to do.
Well, you and I both did the Monroe program that deals with just that kind of thing. I had a very frustrating and illuminating experience in one of the experiments. They had circular neon tubes. They weren't attached to anything. You were holding the neon tube, and with the other hand, you were to sort of stroke it and make it light, which is, of course, impossible. I mean, we're not just talking about, surface friction or anything like that, but you were supposed to make it light up. And I'm there in a room with maybe, there weren't a lot of people in that class, but maybe 16, 20 people at the most. And I'm watching everybody else do it, and mine doesn't do. I can't find the trick, right? The woman next to me, she does, and hers lights up, and I look at her, and she just reaches over and touches my shoulder, and mine lights up. She lets go and unlights again. I'm still working at it. Guy on the other side, his lights up. He figures it out. He touches me on the shoulder. Mine lights up. He lets go. But then I finally learned to do it. Well, that has nothing to do with anything that you could make a scientific law about. If you assume that we're separate, for one thing, if you assume that mind is different from matter, for another thing, I mean, all of the assumptions. But here's the thing, Dirk. I knew, I felt that I knew that it was possible. Somebody inside did not know, and until I could finally make it do, it was still obvious it couldn't be done. Even after somebody had touched me and made it happen and stop, I still couldn't find. I mean, I wasn't looking for it in terms of robots, but that's what it amounted to, yeah. And until I could make that unconscious conviction malleable, and the only way to do it in that instance was to actually watch myself do it, which is backwards, But there was a really strong presumption against it. I think that's true of so many things in our life. Go ahead.
Well, no, and in that example, I am fairly confident from hard science background that there is some physical principle involved that's causing that to be explainable about what's occurring. It's not through any of the usual means. This is not static discharge. This is not any of voltage or gradients or anything like that. This is something else, and it's whispering about science that we don't know. Another example of that, and these are the ones I really love. One of the researchers who works with the Institute created an electronic device that it's a device of his own creation that has 3 quartz cubes in it. I think they're quartz, with silvered faces on three opposite directions. So it's the XYZ directions. And an amplifier that comes out. It's electronically shielded. That's in the box that's shielded. That's in a box that's shielded. And then it comes out to a detector and to a counter. And it took the longest time to understand, because this device in theory should detect nothing. And he's tried it with, high intensity electromagnetic fields, with radiation. Nothing makes this thing do anything. Except periodically this thing will have a pulse, and there's no explanation for what that is. Well, it took him, I don't know, a year or two to finally realize, oh, it's detecting high energy muons, which are heavy, heavy electrons for the world, the difference it makes, coming in from space. So heavy particles hit the atmosphere, they create an ion storm, and muons are created. They live for a time and they decay. And this thing is seeing the muon pass through the detector. Okay. At least that's the idea. Maybe that's right. High probability it is. And in hard science, only in the last 15 years or so have we had muon detectors actually created. And they've used them for things like looking at the reactors in Fukushima to see inside the reactors, looking through the building using coincidence counting muon detectors. Well, anyway, all of that's science stuff. But what's interesting about this thing is the experiments at the Monroe Institute on an evening where what he'll do is have this detector set up and it's got a certain count rate. Well, it's random. It's what the counts are that are out there. And then he'll offer up that people can come and sit in front of it. And all he wants to know is your name and whether you're going to make it go up or go down. And the idea is to make the count rate either go up or go down. And people successfully make the count rates go up or the count rates go down. Okay. How does that work? If this is a stream of subatomic particles from space at some rate that's occurring naturally, how do you put out a field that makes muons go away? How do you make a field that attracts muons?
You don't.
And so part of the researcher's idea is that what's happening is we're influencing the counter itself. But what you see on the counter is not just counts. You actually see the waveform of the particles coming through. It's counting actual things.
Oh, really? Okay. I assumed it was just directly affecting the counter. All right.
It's counting actual things. And so then it's like, wait a minute. How is this even possible? And the answer is there is no answer. We do not have any clue. Now, fundamental reality works in some way. There must be an explanation. We don't know. This is science that's unknown. And it's just fascinating to watch as people are able to accomplish things with intention without knowing anything about how it's actually working.
I would bet if they had children in there, the kids would outperform the adults 10-1.
Yes.
Because they don't know it can't be done.
Yes. And different people were more or less able to do it.
Sure. I would probably be unable to move it because I would want to be able to move it so much. And you can't do it by will. And you can't do it just as when you're trying to remote view. If you try guessing is the exact opposite way of doing it. And it actually doesn't, it not only doesn't work, but it anti-works. It makes perceiving impossible because then how do you tell you perception from your guesses? But
well, the other one that's interesting, it's a statistical method because science a lot of times uses statistics, is that the Princeton group created a thing that were random number generators that they could detect randomness and monitor it over time, the sphere group. And one of the things that happened is they set up one of those at the Monroe Institute and another one down the hill away from the Institute. And the idea they wanted to see is what happens when this group is doing consciousness work for a week, particularly on Wednesdays, which is one of the key days. And what they saw was huge deviations from randomness, which were balanced by the other detector down the hill having an anti-balance.
To make the average come out right.
Made the average come out right. It's like, wait a minute. What? How? What is this?
I think it was it Einstein who said that quantum theory, he couldn't believe in it because he said he didn't believe God plays dice with the universe. And it didn't make any sense to one of the most brilliant men that existed in life. But the fact that it didn't make any sense doesn't matter. Non-locality is apparently a real phenomenon. If you have non-locality, then what do you do about double-blind experiments?
Well, and this very much goes into Bohm's work, where he described, the intrinsic and extrinsic, basically the world that you can see and the actual operating world underneath you can't, that influences the world that you can see.
You mean the implicate and the explicit?
I'm sorry, implicate and explicit. I get the words wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, implicate and explicate. But along with that, you have other fields of science do the same thing. In my case, as we've talked about, I objected as Einstein did as a kid. I was a weird kid playing with quantum mechanics as a teenager. It's not normal. Anyway, in doing that, I objected to the 5 foundations of quantum mechanics. And only recently I've managed to put that all back together and rederive quantum mechanics directly from relativity, where the equations are damn near identical. They perform in exactly the same way, though the terms in the equations mean different things. And it specifically overcomes Einstein's objection, because what it basically says is that rather than being a statistical phenomenon, which is the way quantum mechanics is normally done, that it's a matter of the nature of the spread of things in reality. It is this distributed connectiveness that's actually there. And the reason I mention this is only that, like I say, my interpretation of where magic is apparent is it's the things that we don't understand where we're seeing real stuff. We're doing real stuff. But like in this case, if you can change your mind about how this is structured, suddenly all of the weirdness disappears.
Well, as you're saying that, it occurs to me that our next topic probably could be, anyway, science and religion, because they go at it from the opposite ends of the spectrum. And the things that are stumbling blocks for science are not for religion, because they're starting from somewhere else, and vice versa, because a religious experience cannot be reduced to mathematics. And so
and as you were saying earlier, it's, to my mind, it's a different perspective on the same. It's seeing the world, the real world,
yes,
through very different belief lenses,
yes,
and seeing the same thing and simply interpreting what we're seeing in different terms.
You know, when I first began talking with the guys, and this goes back. Well, I was writing Muddy Tracks, so it goes back before the turn of the century. Actually, it's more than 25 years ago, and they said you need to either be able to see the world in two different ways at the same time, or if you can't do that, you need to flip from one to the other, and any one point of view is going to be inadequate, but that you can do it, even if you have to look at it in a way that makes it blurry because you're seeing two different ways and they blur, that is better than one view. And maybe for our next, session, let me find my copy of Muddy Tracks and I'll read just this little bit that they dictated in there. Shall we do that?
We'll do that. One other thing I wanted to note before we depart on this one is that within both science and within religion and art, for that matter, there are concepts of beauty that when you look at the world and you look at it through those frames, there is exquisite beauty.
Beauty equals truth, somebody said, and I think
beauty equals truth. And the artists capture it incredibly well in many cases. I think religion captures it very well in certain cases, in certain ways, particularly within that frame. And science does as well. And one of the things, the reason I want to mention that is going back to like the quantum theory idea. When you rearrange things and you find a new truth, whether I've actually done that or not not really relevant, but let's say that it actually is true. When you find a new truth and you get to see it for the first time,
it'll have a beauty to it.
Beauty there that's just like, yes. Oh, now I understand.
Yeah, and it can be relied on. Yeah. Even in engineering bridges, the most not accurate. What's the word I want? The most sustainable design for a bridge will also be the most aesthetically pleasing.
Often, yeah.
It's just so it seems.
And I know for religion, you get the same thing of the ecstasy that occurs when you finally have this revelation of how things are, I think is the same sort of perspective.
I have to think about that one. All right. So let's talk about science and religion next time. And I'll start with a little quote from Muddy Tracks.
All right.
It feels like it's been about a half an hour, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for listening in. Hopefully something here was useful for you. And we had fun chatting. So,
and if not, they're at least grateful they're not stuck inside of our minds,
Oh, and particularly, as one of my coworkers said, you don't ever want to look inside his head.
All right. Next time.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.